The mythology of racism and the mythology that was built around black people is used to justify segregation, justify discrimination, justify all forms of misbehavior toward us as a people. Once you use that mythology and use the mythology to create an environment, you actually then begin to create behavior as a result of placing the person in a particular environment, you see. And this is what happens. You put people in a particular environment. After a while, that environment is reflected in their behavior. You put a person in prison, you keep them in prison, they learn to be criminal. Yes, and we know prisons are schools for criminality. But you see, the process of putting them in is overlooked. The process of creating the environment is overlooked. What you do is count noses after you've done it. And you say, oh, well, you know, so many of them are arrested for violence. That means they must be violent. But the whole process of how it happened is not dealt with. I deal with something in black on black violence I call the structuration of crime. What am I trying to say there? Simply because a man mugs someone else doesn't mean he's more criminal than a man who swindles, even though we are often convinced of that. Often crime is not irrational, but a rational process. People weigh, they weigh all kinds of options often when they engage in crime. When you've robbed a person of education, you've robbed them of job opportunities and possibilities, locked them in what amounts to reservations. If they had the same level of criminality as a person who has a degree in accounting, works as a vice president of a bank, they're going to create two different sorts of crimes, not because one is more criminal than the other, but because of the structure in which they both reside. As I've said before, it's crazy if you are an accountant and you have control of the money and you can electronically transfer millions of dollars to your own account for you to go out in the street and knock somebody in the head for a few nickels. You have what? Different options. Not that you're necessarily less criminal. Your object is the same, to do what? Get money. You look at your options. So, hey, man, I can transfer this, doop, 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 doop. I got $1 million, I'm done with it. But another man who's not what? Sitting at that position, is not in that place, looks at his options. Well, I either got to break into a house, knock somebody in the head, one way or the other, you see. And yet we don't talk about, you see, how so-called black-on-black violence and the criminality in our community is structured by the very system itself. You see, how placing and restrict people under certain circumstances and restricting their options, we literally dictate the types of crime that they will commit when they commit them. And then we want to talk about their violent nature and try to connect it with their genes. See, when these whites were begging and poor and weak over here in this country, they didn't hesitate to kill and mug the Indians, did they? To rape and rob and steal and do whatever they could. Once they got it under control and passed their mafia rules, they didn't have to engage in that anymore. They used their army and police force and other kind of things to do that. And then they can look like they are less violent and less, this and that. Why? Because they're less criminal? No. Because their options are different. You see? And in a way, then, if we to change the nature of so-called criminality, as I tell people, look, You want us to get out of violent crime? Let us become accountants. No? Then we'll just run a good S&L scandal on you. But we won't hit anybody in the head, Won't shoot anybody. But it's very important for us to understand as we got to rush through here. But we got to look at these kind of things, you see, before we just jump up and make moral condemnations and make psychological condemnations of people and other kind of things. That's why, you see, you got to be African-centered in your education so that you can perform the right kind of analyses and things. But when you let other people teach your children, you let other people teach you, they're going to teach you and educate you into ignorance and into stupidity, I'm telling you.